Well, good morning. uh, yes, here we are again, and it's good to be here again. It's raining. I can hear the rain from outside, which is beautiful. And last night I was with my friend the firekeeper. Everyone's got a name in this place because I'm not going to use real names ever in this place. But my friend the firekeeper, known him pretty much all my life now, and what I wanted to say today was something about our dialogue last night because we're both Gen X men. And it's interesting, actually, in this healing journey that I'm talking about. I talk a lot about, the end of the paradigm and the collapse of our society and the effect this is all happening for us, right? And at the same time, like he and I are part of a generation that's called Generation X. And that's interesting to me because we were the last generation to be raised, to be marinated in the old paradigm. Like when we were young, and I'll only speak about myself now. When I was young, I was raised by British people and people who were relations, of my parents who I met in Scotland because my adopted family was Scottish, first generation immigrants to Canada, couldn't have a child, adopted me, you know, that's another story. But I was very close to Scotland. I went to Scotland every year when I was a little boy with my mom. And so very close to people who had been in World War II. I mean, wow. For someone born in 1970, that's an interesting opportunity. You know what I mean? And World War II was it was the redemption of the colonial powers, I feel, because, and this is a whole other long conversation in itself, and I'm just going to mention this and then just change gears to what I am going to say today. So anyway, I see World War II as a redemption for the colonial powers because Nazism, abomination and abhorrence and total moral degeneracy in an empty ideology. It was really the total shadow, the utter most concentrated distillation of this spirit of violent domination and enslavement that was in colonialism that no one really knew about for centuries and centuries. No one really had any awareness of that. But, Nazi Germany, and really Germany came late to the imperialism. They came late to the party. They wanted to get in on it, right? And that's why they were very aggressive in Europe, because Germany was a very late empire to the game of imperialism, which was the game of colonialism. And so, I mean, I'm glossing over a very complex situation. But the rise of Nazism, to me, as a figurative expression, a cultural expression, is like the ultimate dark side of colonialism, practiced with a kind of bureaucratic, industrial fervor, which is what made it such an abomination, right? And why I call it a redemption for the colonial powers is that everyone got together to go against Nazism. So much so that no one even saw the villainy of Soviet fascist domination. No one even saw that coming because the existential threat of Nazism, the danger of it was too present, and its mandate of racist hatred was too clear. No one could ignore that, And it was only until after the war, when everyone was basking in the glory and maybe the genuine glory of having defeated this evil, that people, well, first of all, many things happen. One thing, I don't think it's any coincidence that after World War II and moving into the late 40s, 50s, 60s, etc., that's when you see all of the former colonial possessions being given to the peoples of those lands. Independence to African countries, independence to India, independence to Pakistan, Chinese Cultural Revolution, all these things began happening. The rest of the world began stepping back into its own power because the colonial powers, I think, recognized in World War II, well, this is the essence of it. I'm not saying this is conscious. I'm just saying that I just notice it. You know what I mean? But at the same time, that's when the Soviet Union began to spread its tentacles, because in this basking glory, they're like, yeah, we were part of it too. And then they just took all of Eastern Europe and said, this is ours now, fuck you, because Soviet Union was nothing more than violent tyranny and slavery, which is, part of the interesting aspect, the way Putin glorifies that era as well, because that is ultimately what Russia is doing now. It's like this old-fashioned attempt at tyranny, basically. Anyway, glossing over a vast topic, and I'm sorry to even introduce it. It's just that, it's fresh in my mind, right? But, after World War II, there was this brief high summer or fall, I don't know what you want to call it. Like, it was this brief glow of like, my God, we've all done the right thing, And I mean, the baby boom, I think the generation, like in my parents' generation, right? They lived and died in the last glow of the paradigm, the Western paradigm. And I was raised in that. And so I knew people who had been in World War II, all my heroes were like British heroes, who fought in World War II, more so than like Vietnam or Korea. As I got older, I became much more fascinated. I wanted to meet and talk to people who'd been in those wars. Like, for example, I discovered my birth heritage, and I discovered that my birth father, even though he'd been born Canadian, he'd gotten into some trouble or something like that. And he had served in Vietnam, 2 tours in Vietnam, and I so wanted to hear his stories. But when I talked to him, it was, he lived in Florida and I lived in Canada, and we never made the connection, and he wouldn't talk to me about it. He would say, well, if we ever have a beer together, we'll talk about it. And it was like, in my mind, I was like, well, that might not be possible because of the way life, we were so far apart, you know what I mean? And as it turns out, we never met. We sort of like briefly talked a couple of times on the phone, and we just never kindled anything, and then whoosh, off in different directions. And I don't even know if he's even alive now, you know what I mean? So that's just a lost opportunity. And in my own life, I notice, and this is a whole other topic again, is that my connection to the old world there's always a breakage, you know what I mean? There's always something in the way. Maybe I'll talk about that another time. So anyway, being Gen X is interesting because we're the first generation that really began to experience the world at the end of the old paradigm. And when Douglas Copeland coined the phrase Generation X in his novel, which was written in the 90s sometime, I believe. I can't really remember. I didn't check my facts here. You can check the facts if you're really interested to read that book and think about it, where these terms came from, Gen Z and whatever's going on, right? They came from that. What interests me is no one talks about, well, why do we have these new generation labels? That's because these are the generations, I believe, that have existed since the end of the old paradigm. And I think the challenges of Gen Z, it's like, this goes right back to the first podcast I made, which was commenting on Sadhguru talking to Joe Rogan, right? Because Sadhguru at that time was talking about everyone has lost the idea of heaven, right? Well, and that's a good thing, because it's an evolutionary process to stop objectifying things and bring it inside of ourselves where life arises, right? And yet, why is that? Well, that is because heaven is part of the old paradigm. Heaven, as we understand it, is part of Christianity, right? And we all know that that's bullshit now, because Christianity funded colonialism. Christianity, the ideology of Christianity, I should say, pushed colonialism. And Christians performed atrocities for centuries. Atrocities of violent domination, tyranny, and slavery. And so it's a bankrupt ideology now. That is not to say anything about Jesus or being loving and being devotional. That is simply that the paradigm is gone, right? And so as a Gen Xer, like, I was marinated in that old paradigm. I lived it, I tasted it, especially in the 70s. You know what I mean? Like, in the 70s, it was still intact. There's still this idea that everything in the West was good and everything was good and all the independence and all the nations around the world. Britain's Commonwealth was developing. Empire turned into Commonwealth. I mean, that's a little before my time, but the idea of Commonwealth was there, you know? And then I think perhaps punk, the tone of punk in the mid-70s was the beginning of something. And then in the 80s, things began really fracturing. And at the same time, I think that the beginning of pride, you know, in the homosexual movement also arose in the 80s. Suddenly, homosexuality, even though it was, you know, because of AIDS and whatnot, came to attention. There's just more acceptance, you know what I mean? So any breakage and disintegration of the old paradigm has also been at the same time the expansion of possibility in the individual. And so as a Generation Xer, you know, I was raised in this concrete, you know, centralized idea, you know, and then as I grew up, you know, the phenomenon of Gen X is to be like, well, we were raised to live in the old paradigm, but here we are in the new world, you know. In my own life, I call it being a 20th century man. You know, I'm a 20th century man living in the 21st century world. That's how I talk about it to my friends, right? What I'm really saying is that as a Gen Xer, really, we are an interesting generation, and we're an interesting resource for the future if people choose to talk to us about it, because we both have that feeling. We like the fire keepers of the old paradigm. I'm not saying anything good about colonialism. I'm not saying anything good about violent domination or slavery, but I'm saying that there are certain positive aspects of the old paradigm. You know, like I utterly reject, for example, Christian ideology, and yet Jesus is a world teacher of the devotional path that we need to bring forward with us, you know, out of the old paradigm, right? Last night, my friend the firekeeper was talking about the idea of citizenship, you know, and how, like, citizenship as being only for, like, white people, and it no longer holds, right? But the idea of citizenship that we all share together equally, I think it's a global phenomenon, is something we need to bring forward, for example. So in other words, citizenship is good. Old paradigm citizenship, which excludes too many people, bad. So what we got to do is be sure that we don't lose many of the positives of the old paradigm, even though much of it is gone forever and gone for good. You know, it's for better, right? Because at the end of the old paradigm is the rise of the individual, is the rise of sexual freedom, is the rise of many aspects of this new enculturation. And yet at the same time, if you look at the crisis of Gen Z people, say, you've got these people who don't know heaven, right? As Sadhguru would say, the rise of mental health, addiction, you know, suicide rates, despair, you know what I mean? Like whatever you want to call it, right? I think that Gen Z people, like, look at it, like Generation X, we're the first generation who've been given a variable letter to define us, because it's like, who the fuck are we? What are we doing, right? We're raised the old paradigm, living without the paradigm now. What the fuck do we do? You know what I mean? And now people are born, they don't even have any taste of the old paradigm. So they don't have any idea why to do anything, right? And to make matters even more complex, we get this evolutionary tool of technology, which means that we're getting sucked into something which we don't really understand, but we pretend that we understand, and it's creating new levels of disconnection and dysphoria in us. And I think it's something we need to really ponder. So as you can see, there's a lot on my mind from last night talking to my friend the firekeeper. And I've already spent a bunch of time on it. You know what I mean? So, and yet it doesn't get to really what I'm going to say now. It's a bit of a taster, I guess. So I'm going to go on a couple topics today, just because I'm riffing. It's because this is what I'm doing. You know what I mean? So I'm going to return to this Gen X topic because, for me, it's an interesting one. You know, and it goes in lots of ways, and it's a way in which like it informs a lot of the way I am in my presentation. And who knows, as I get into what I want to talk about right now, maybe it'll come up again, right? So what I'm interested to say today, what my main topic today is finally someone left a comment and asked a question. And thank you to whoever you are who left that comment. That is what I've been waiting for, because I love interaction, because interaction gets me outside of myself. You know, I sit here, I'm a talking head, you know, I'm sharing as much as I can of what draws me outside of my conditioned response. And this is a process which draws me out of my conditioned response, and which is my discipline to practice with you, right? But by asking a question, by someone framing a question, right? The very asking of a question opens new space, you know? And I want to, again, honor whoever asked that question. Thank you so much. And it wasn't even a question of who knows, I'm not even going to comment on it. I'm just thankful someone asked the question, because that means something about what's going on here was enough to draw someone to go, well, what about this aspect? And to ask a real question, which then gives this space to explore something new for me, right? And so the question was, do I practice semen retention? This is something that Sadhguru talks about, but it's a part of every older religious system that I found out, which is to say celibacy. Do not practice sex. Sex is seen as something that's not spiritual somehow. You know, if you dissipate yourself in sex, you've got less energy for your spiritual pursuit. Right? And there's no denying that, like, you know, especially as a man, you know, when you come, when you orgasm, right? There's generally a dissipation of energy. You know, you've exploded, it's all happened, you know what I mean? And then there's you know, basking in the afterglow as I look at it, right? But the question is to me specifically, so I can only respond from my own experience and for the things that resonate in me. And I want to tie it into my topic of yesterday, which was talking about surface tension. Because again, if like surface tension again is that I used the analogy of, like, you know, a little insect landing on the surface of the pond. You see that up close. The little insect cannot get, it just sits on the surface of the water. Surface tension, right? As a picture, I think that is a really good picture to think about the way our little analytical process, right? Our conditioned response, even though we live almost exclusively within it, it can never have the strength, gravity, depth, impact to break the surface tension and get to what's real, which is really got nothing to do with it. You know what I mean? Because the living moment is always new. It's always authentic. It's always to be discovered. But if you live in your mental process, which is a byproduct of like things that have happened in the past, you can never connect it. You got to somehow break through that surface tension to get into the living moment. And you know, I talked about some song lyrics and stuff, but today, because sex is the topic, right? How about the idea of, like, you know, you meet someone you're attracted to, and you're always looking for that way to break the ice. Well, breaking the ice is another way of understanding the surface tension, you know? When you meet someone you're attracted to, you want to share that intimacy. You want to explore all the energy that you feel, which is a sex energy. Yes, that's what attraction is, right? But attraction, like all sex is energy, but not all energy is sex, right? So that's a key distinction, because what I feel for, especially as I've gotten older, that sex attraction, you know, it's like, I want to break the ice. I want to get in there. I want to share all that intimacy and see how much energy we authentically share, you know? And breaking the ice is that thing which allows us to get through the surface tension of not knowing each other, right? So again, it's like, and again, your analytical mind, your fears, your worries, all the, whatever that is going on in there that keeps you stuck, right? Or just keeps you fixed. It doesn't help. You got to be fluid if you want to meet someone you're attracted to. And then once you break that ice, you're in flow state together. and then you explore that. And if you're lucky, you make a connection, and then you begin exploring some beautiful love journey together. You know what I mean? Notice I say someone you're attracted to, because even though I'm a 20th century man and I'm a heterosexual man, like, so I'm attracted to women and all things feminine, you know what I mean? Like, this just draws me out of myself, right? I am at a deeper level an energy being. And so as an energy being, I feel that people who are gender flexible and gender, I don't know how to describe it because I'm not one of them. I personally, I want to hear more from them, actually. Like, what the hell's going on there? You know what I mean? Like, how is that feeling manifesting? You know what I mean? Because I'm interested. Because as an energy being, I agree. I agree that gender is a kind of illusion. It's kind of an illusion aspect of the material world that we live in. And yet, I think to say that it's a social construct is too shallow. And what I mean by that is that gender is the idea of man and woman, masculine and feminine, is a reproductive quality, and reproduction is a byproduct of bodies. So if we're saying that gender is a social construction, yes, but sexuality, right, and it is like, it's a part of bodies, right? So it's like being free to choose your gender isn't just an aspect of defying the patriarchy or defying, like the evils of like society or however it's conceived, right? I think it's far deeper than that. I think it's to say we are discovering a new way that hasn't been really considered since the beginning of bodies. Like, if you remember with this evolutionary tool of the internet, right? I think that it's as changing for us as embodied individuals as whatever single-celled organisms began to create in the bottoms of the ocean to create bodies to explore the ocean, which is what they did, which we are at the end of that process. Now, that's just the picture of evolution. It happens to make sense to me in my body, in everything that I perceive with my senses, in the physical world that we live in. It's like, I think evolution makes a lot of sense, and the manifestation of this tool of the internet, I mean, is like a next step, a possible next step, because we are coming together. We have new patterns of connection that are possible because of the internet, So I don't think it's any coincidence that we're exploring gender in a new way, because gender, sexuality, I mean, we can attach it to the old paradigm, but it's not just the old paradigm of like Western Christian ideology, colonialism. It's like it goes back to animal life, embodied animal life itself. That's not to wrong gender flexibility, gender fluidity. What I'm saying is I think it represents a more deep and profound possible step in evolution. Because as an energy being, I know that my manhood is not who I am. I know that. My body, I'm not this body, I'm not these thoughts, I'm energy. I am my energy consciousness. That's true for me, right? So my sexuality is simply like, it's like, as I inhabit my body and I allow the energy to kindle through my body, because our body is where it all happens, right? And I allow the flow to happen inside myself, right? Now that I've been broken free from my conditioning, and I'm not like a slave to being a crippled, emotionally disabled idiot fool. So now that I'm flowing, right? It's like my attractions are much more clear to me, and being a man, I don't know, women pull, I feel a pull in myself towards women, and so that's just my authentic self, you know. So for someone who experiences that pull to, you know, towards same sex, or that experiences that pull in the sense of I'm not even a man, I'm a woman, or I'm not a woman, I'm a man. Like those are not experiences I can ever talk about, but I'm sure interested in what they're going through, because as energy beings, I think that those are genuine and authentic possibilities. And as we go from the center, like the central solidified reality of the old paradigm, as it continues to fracture and become chaos. And let's face it, our world is chaos right now, right? There's also, like, this is also the opportunity of the individual now. It's all about the individual now. Everything is individuated, right? And based on this completely dissolved individuation, right? Now we've got new social cohesion possibilities, right? Especially through the internet, right? So anyway, you can see how deep this topic is, because it's the topic of sexuality, right? And I began in the idea of, like, you know, let's break the ice. Let's break the ice, you know. Let's get into flow state together, you know. And honestly, like, wherever someone is strong in their sexuality, whatever it might be, I am an ally of you, you know, because for me, it was like, even though I'm just a boring old 20th century heterosexual, you know, like to break out of my own closet, as it were, the closet of, like, the horrible fucked up conditioning that I was trapped in, right? It's like I'm an ally of anyone seeking freedom and expression and healing and evolution and dreaming and loving, of course, right? So whenever I think about sexuality, it's like I got to be clear, because all sex is energy, but not all energy is sex, right? So in that way, I'm a Jungian, not a Freudian, right? So semen retention. All I can say is that something I learned from Carlos Castaneda. So in the Carlos Castaneda Toltec system, right, when it comes to sexuality, they concur. Don't have any sex as you're learning about dreaming, as you're trying to retain your energy, to practice your stalking and to shift your assemblage point and to evolve as an energy being, right? They say restrict sex, you know, recapitulate, which is to say sort out your life, find out all the ways you're draining your energy. Because when you're in an energy drain situation, which I interpret as being caught up in your conditioned response, right? While you continue to be caught in your conditioned response, you are at risk of using your vital sex energy in a draining way, right? So for a certain period of time, you got to not have sex in order to ensure that when and if you do have sex, it's an energy productive event. This is my interpretation. Right? Energy productive event, rather than an energy depleting event, whatever it might be, right? And so in the Toltec system, right? As you heal yourself, again, I'm sharing my knowledge, and by knowledge I mean what I have experimented with, practiced, found to be true, and continue to live, right, from the Toltec system. And yet I put my own language on it. So when I talk about healing journey, right, I am really talking about what the Carlos Castaneda Don Juan Toltec tradition describes as recapitulation, which is to say, going through your life and unhooking yourself from all those things which created your conditioned response, shall we say, okay? So, and this includes going back to your very conception and having a look at the parents who conceived you, because he says that they assert that your basic energy levels, part of the vast complexity that goes into someone's energy level, what we're born with, okay, is the excitement level that your parents had when they made you. And I just, it makes so much sense to me, because I've always been like an energy lunatic in my life. And in fact, that was my problem with my energy devoid, almost loveless parents. You know what I mean? Like that, my adoptive parents, I mean, right? Like I was adopted by these people who were just flatlining, you know what I mean? And so it's this high energy thing. Like I just had to be constantly fucking hammered until I was like beaten down and fat and listless. That's what they liked in me, right? Which is sad and tragic, and it's blah blah blah. Healing journey. I've lived all that. I've said that many times before, right? But if when I go back to my conception, my mom in 1970, my birth mother, I should say, was 15. My birth father was in his 20s. So like something was going on there. Like in this day and age, that's stat rape. You know what I mean? And in those days, it was all hushed up because of the morality of the time. She was sent away to have me adopted. In that gone to an aunt's. She's gone to live with her aunt in Montreal. It was the eastern townships of Quebec that happened, right? But no one ever talked about it, right? It was just hushed up, So again, I'm an abortion let live, right? And in my own journey, I've intuitively explored what it must have been like to be like marinated in that womb. And then, what I learned when I started discovering my adoption for real in my late 20s, I began exploring it. And the reason why I explored it, by the way, is because I visited Ireland randomly. And visiting Ireland, I had the most amazing feeling of being at home that I've ever known. Even though I've been in Scotland all my life, and I definitely have a feeling whenever I go to Scotland, like, there's something here, right? Yet, 1994, I visited Ireland totally by chance. That's a long story. The moment I landed in Ireland, in Belfast in particular, I was just like, oh my God, this is home. This is home to me, So powerful that for the first time in my life, I was interested in my adoption. I'm like, wow, I wonder if the people who made me were from here, because this is so powerful, right? And when I started having those feelings, it occurred on like the north coast of Northern Ireland, right? Actually on the road towards this place called Ballycastle. And what I learned is that my birth people on my mother's side actually came from south of Belfast, so in that region. So it was like an uncanny, like down the road, basically. Like it was like, oh my God, like it was the first time in my life my feelings erupted into reality that was confirmed by my historic experience, And I never, in my birth father's side, they didn't really keep records. They didn't know anything about their past, but they think that they were perhaps somewhere in this sort of Irish, Welsh, Scottish zone, you know what I mean? And I must say, bagpipes make me weep with a fierce joy. And being in Ireland, I went to Ireland in 2017, or I went to all of UK. I took my daughter on a tour of UK in 2017. And again, love all of the British Isles. I just could spend a long time just being there and just soaking it all in, right? And yet the moment I landed in Ireland, in Dublin this time, ooh, the feeling of being at home is something that is special to me. I'm sure lots of people experience that in Ireland, but for me, it's a Gaelicness, it's a Celticness that's in me. Wow, I've really gone far afield here because I'm talking about sexuality and semen retention ultimately, right? But to talk about my adoption, to talk about my birth people, it's like I'm talking about the energies that made me, and I don't think I was the product of a bored fuck, as Carlos Castaneda would put it. I think I was born of a fuck that was excited and forbidden and a kind of onslaught of sexual desire and energy. So that my energy is the energy of an onslaught. I've always had the total forward energy. You know what I mean? And when I'm playing music, it is high intensity. My bliss activates when I'm at a high energy intensity, even as I am in my 50s. I'm still I generate more energy than a lot of the younger people I've seen around. You know what I mean? Because that's the nature of the sexuality that was put in me, right? And so in the Castaneda system, you still need to be careful with your sexuality while you are recapitulating your life until you come to a place which is called losing the human form, which is for me coming to some awareness of your energy being. The moment you start realizing your energy being, and you realize that you're not your body and you're not your thoughts, you're not any of these outward projections in the world, you're really an energy field that is your consciousness, right? When you begin realizing that, and you're living a disciplined life, and you're in a constant process of not allowing the conditioned response, which is all about fear and self-importance and energy draining aspects, right? Once you're in that process, right? Well, rather, shall I say, when you're in the process of creating it, you should be careful with your sexuality, right? And probably one of the wastrel byproducts of my horrible wasted decades of life was that I wasn't careful with my sexuality. And it was definitely in the service of my horrible conditioning, you know what I mean? And then since my awakening and since my liberation, which is not a fixed state, but it was just the beginning. Liberation isn't like, oh, it's over now, I'm done, finished. No, liberation is the beginning. Then the real work begins. Then your discipline can yield real results because you're flowing. You're in flow state. You know, you've broken the surface tension. You're able to break the surface tension. Once you're able to, then it's a discipline to continue breaking it, because it's always going to that conditioned response always wants to stop you. You know what I mean? Which is why it's a constant discipline, you know? And yet it's a discipline which creates new momentum and eventually gets easier and easier. And then I find that like the conditioned response is really just like our evolutionary process of remembering, pondering, and visualizing. That is what our mind is about. That's the process. And so once you free it from all of the ways that it's been turned into this petty tyrant and jailer inside of us, you know what I mean? And the way it makes us susceptible to the slavery of our collapsing culture, right? And the vampires who are vending all their products to try and sustain their power and enslave us, right? When you can free your mind from that, it becomes your servant, which is what it should be. You know, it's a servant, it's a tool, you know? So like when I'm playing music, for example, that high energy experience, which takes me to my energy being and my energy consciousness, right? The beautiful poetry, even the, you know, the choice of notes and melodies and chord progressions, whatever, that's all, you know, that's the memory, pondering, visualization process, right? It's in its true place at that point, which is a passenger of your energy vehicle, your aliveness, right? So, you know, recapitulation is the healing journey, right? My healing journey is, in a Carlos Castaneda language, recapitulation. Unhooking myself from all of those energy draining traumas. You know what I mean? Traumas drain our energy because they create a dissonance in us, a dislocation, a fracture from our true energy being some way or another, right? So the thing is, what I notice, and I'm sorry this is real ramblesome, but I don't know, it's a huge and important topic, and it's literally one of the cutting edges of my being, literally, because it's one of my stokes. Sex is a stoke of mine, you know what I mean? And I mean that genuinely. I don't think it is a genuine stoke for everyone, you know? I mean, sex is, our attraction is one of the engines in our lives, right? And yet look at how different sex is now in our culture, you know, and how people express their sexuality and how they are together. It's so different now because we're freed from the old paradigm. We're freed from these restrictive ways. Our society's in collapse. And there's lots of negatives to do with that. And yet it's also the freedom of the individual to explore really what is it that you want. You can explore your dream. You can be anything you want these days, right? But how are we visualizing that and exploring it, right? So for me, I'm not a practitioner deliberately of like, if I'm single right now, so I am practicing semen retention inadvertently, right? Also, I'm older, you know what I mean? And I have to say, as an older man, it is depressing to see your energy come down slowly. And yet, it was the lessening of my energy as I got into my late 30s, into my 40s, that created some damage in me that allowed me to wake up more. Because when I was younger, I glossed over all the problems of my broken, trauma-induced, shitty conditioning, right? Through energy, you know, I had so much energy, I could ignore it, right? But it was only in my late 30s into my 40s that my energy levels began to come down, so that my obsessive exercise addiction began to hurt my body, because I was exercising like a 20-year-old, you know, at the age of 40, right? And you just can't do that. You need to start being more careful, right? You should always be more careful. But the mistakes I was making, being addicted to exercise, not understanding the clench, wince, recoil, and therefore always proceeding from this tension, this place of tension, and using exercise as a way to further dissociate myself from my authentic feelings. You know what I mean? That's what addictive process does, right? It just led to breakdown after breakdown after breakdown, to physical injury, you know, and so a lot of my recovery, a lot of my healing has been to like address physical pain. Again, it's in the body, right? Physical pain. And as I've discovered physical pain, I've discovered all of those conditioned responses. And yet the basic one of being a shameful, utterly wrong disaster who should just shut the fuck up in order to just to be allowed to stay around. You know what I mean? I couldn't break through that one, you know? I had to be broken from me. You know, I needed spirit to come into my life. And as I've said time and again, thank God it happened. You know what I mean? And now my healing can actually flow completely, truly, you know? And so I've found that my sexuality has transformed in that when I'm in a sexual situation now, like what I'm feeling for is not only the attraction, right? The attraction leads me into interactions, and you know, when I'm looking to break the ice, right? Break through the surface tension and get into flow state together, right? But then I'm aware of the energy, because I want it to be an evolutionary dreaming experience, right? And this is something that ties me to another character, Alejandro Jodorowsky. He has written a couple of books based on this concept he's got called psychomagic. And so for him, he looks at theater and acting as a way of healing and evolving yourself. Sacred theater, I think he talks about it, you know, in terms of like when you act things out, you have the possibility of healing dimensions inside of yourself. That makes a lot of sense to me, because in the Carlos Castaneda system, they talk about stalking, controlling behavior, art of performance, right? When you realize you're not your body, then you're in control from your energy consciousness of how you present yourself and who you are, right? Stalking is control of behavior, right? And when you begin to realize your energy being, and you realize like the futility of the material world, then you come to this place that's called controlled folly, which means you realize it's pointless, whatever you do. You know what I mean? Life is pointless. And yet, we're still alive. This is where love comes in. Path of heart, Carlos Castaneda would say, right? Find your path of heart. Find your love. Find your love. Find your stoke. Whatever genuinely, you know, like as a man, like what makes me hard? As a woman, what makes you wet? right? Like in whatever gender variety you have, like whatever that is, you gotta go there and stir it up. This is what it's about, right? But don't make it like conquest. Don't make it something to do with your conditioned response, right? Like it's got to come up, right? So therefore, be careful with your sexuality. It's precious. It's your precious energy. What are you doing with it, right? For me, as I've just invoked Alejandro Jodorowsky and his psychomagic, right? I believe that using because sex is energizing for me. For me, like I don't orgasm and then get tired and want to go to sleep. Like coming energizes me. I'm like, I want to talk, I want to be there, I want to bask in it. You know what I mean? Like it's like it doesn't make me tired. It gives me energy, right? And I think that's because the people who created me were really excited, and although they broke apart, and I think my birth mother, like she decided not to destroy me in an abortion, but like give me up for adoption. That's created all sorts of other interesting energy subtleties in my life, right? But the act of the creation has gifted me with a kind of high energy being, and as a result, when I practice sex with my energy awareness, it becomes this psychomagic, it becomes this sacred drama, So when I'm seeking a woman to be in my life now, I'm feeling for these dimensions, like in other words, yeah, I'm attracted, and we know what that's about, right? And as an older man, as I mentioned, energy levels are down, right? I need to be more careful with my sexuality. I can't just be indiscriminate with it. I gotta be careful with it, because as you get older, you gotta really be more careful with your energy, because you have less of it. That's just the reality of life. You know what I mean? And yet, when you live a disciplined life of loving and living from your stoke, you have more energy. You're not wearing yourself down. You're not getting caught up in the worries and the thoughts that drain your energy, right? See how it all comes together, right? This is why your stoke is so important. Nothing to do with your mind, nothing to do with falsehood, nothing to do with the apparent surface. The honest to goodness, deep energy reality. Your true and authentic, genuine, honest consciousness. It's that is where your stoke is. And then you find your sacred balance in that, And that's why I use surfing as a metaphor, That's why my music, it's like there's a sacred balance there, right? When I'm playing music, the only time spirit comes to me is when I'm playing at the very edge of my skill level. I've got to be pushing the edge, because when I'm pushing the edge, I'm coming outside of myself. I'm reaching, if you've listened to me up to this point, right? Reaching, right? Reaching is to be at your balanced, disciplined best, full of your stoke, love energy, and pushing, reaching. You've left the surface tension behind. How far can you go? You can go as far as you got the capacity to go in that moment. For me in music, beautiful poetry, notes, ecstasy, bliss. It is orgasmic. It's a non-liquid cum orgasm for me, right? And in surfing, again, like consider it like surfers. It's like that sacred balance. You're on the edge, right? You're holding yourself together in the sacred balance. You love it because it fills you with this non-cum orgasm joy. It's this energy, because all sexuality is energy, but not all energy is sexuality. And so I think that, yes, you need to be very careful with your sexuality. I think you also got to be honest with your energy levels. You know what I mean? Some people, I think we've got a cult of sexuality in that, because we've got a materialism, and because we've got Viagra and Cialis and like all these products, right? There's a cult of sexuality. Like if you're not having sex, something's wrong with you, right? And that, of course, is to vend products, to vend beauty image, to vend ways to control your appearance in like grotesque plastic surgery. And as I say, sex potency drugs and whatnot, right? Like, so I think there's a lot of dangerous negativeness in it, right? This is why I don't really like talking about sexuality as a topic, because it's so sticky, right? Because our sexuality, it comes to us when we're barely conscious, right? And therefore it gets all cut up in our conditioned response, and before you know it, our sexuality and our energy then becomes co-opted into the draining limitation of the conditioned response. Makes us slaves of commodified, debased society. You know what I mean? And yet society is just relationship between individuals. So sex is a vital component, and really you should explore your sexuality. You know what I mean? And if you're not very sexual, or not really interested in sex, or you're interested in the same sex, or you're not really sexual, you know, like I've heard the term demisexual these days. It's like, just admit it and be honest. It's okay. Every expression is okay, right? Because if you're not particularly sexual, that's not to say you don't have energy. It just means that, like, perhaps your energy is finding a different way of expressing itself. And because there is no reproductive force the way it was like in the old paradigm when things weren't questioned, right? We are free to explore it in a way that are in the best manifestation. We're free to explore our lives the way our energy consciousness directs us. And at the same time, getting to energy consciousness is the great challenge. You know, I think Gen Z people have the possibility to be the most free and the most enlightened people who have ever lived. And yet, because they're enslaved to the internet and they don't have any exposure to the feeling of heaven inside, the feeling of bliss inside, that there's just this wasteland of like mental illness and drug use and internet use, which creates the illusion of connection and community. But really, connection and community is what goes on out here. The internet is nothing more than a communication tool. It should be a way to facilitate connections in the real world. It's not a real thing for us people living on the earth. For earth people, the internet is just a communication tool. Even the idea that it contains everything that we've ever known, everything that human beings have ever learned and discovered, is in the internet, which means it's floating in the air right now, right? But information isn't knowledge. Information is not energy being. Information is not the life you're living. Information is not your aliveness. All that does is facilitate the communication, right? You're talking to someone, every fact you ever want to know was right there. You know, my friend the firekeeper and I, we joke about it, because like when we were younger, if we're having a talk and we want to know something, we don't know a fact, we got to put a pin in it and say, okay, well, we'll go home and look in the encyclopedia to get the facts. And if the encyclopedia didn't have the facts, we'd have to go to the library or talk to someone who knew, right? Those are the old-fashioned ways of looking at things. On the internet, every fact is available. In facts you couldn't even imagine are on there, right? And yet the limitation of that is that information isn't knowing. Information isn't living energy. Information is an experience. So this is why it's dangerous to live your whole life on the internet and to get caught up in the facade that you're generating here, because it's nothing, you know? These Gen Z people, right? What's going to happen when they get in their 30s and they realize they've spent 80%, 90% of their waking life without any actual living experience, and it's all on the internet, which is nothing. It's nothing. It's a nothing of a nothing. Even our physical experience is kind of nothing compared to the energy consciousness that we should be striving for, right? So it's a nothing of a nothing. You know, it's the surface of a surface, like ugh, and yet it's important as well. It is evolutionary if we use it in the right way. Comes back to intent, right? Intent. It comes to intent, right? So in the question of semen and retention, right? That is to say, well, I need to control my sexuality in order to fulfill my intent of my spiritual process. And I do believe it is a useful tool and it's a useful discipline. At the same time, as you begin to explore your life, and you find out so many aspects of yourself through recapitulation, right? Which is Carlos's word, right? Which for me is healing, right? Like the moment, like what's in the way of you loving yourself. And by loving, you must know by now when I'm talking about loving, I'm talking about loving energy being, aliveness, energy field, energy consciousness, right? If there's something in the way, heal it. Healing is that. Just love it. Love the connection. Love the people who hurt you. Love the things love the pain that happened to you. Just love it. Love your way through it. Just like you massage tension out of muscles. It's like wherever that tension is, in my face last night at the bar there with the firekeeper before he arrived, I realized that I was much more relaxed than usual because I've been working so hard at it. And I'm also talking to you about it, the tension in my face. I'm bringing it to my conscious energy attention that like, this is where my evolution is at the moment, healing this, right? And so as it happens right now, there is no woman in my life, so I am retaining semen, right? And so that energy is available, right, for this process. And I would dearly love to be with a woman right now and exploring sex energy, because that is something which is evolutionary, and ultimately it's part of the dream, Like I feel sacred devotion to the woman that I'm with. And where that's reciprocated, if it's reciprocated, at that point, sex, energy, loving, healing, evolving, dreaming, suddenly the sex act becomes something which is energy generative. And that's the point where I'm not going to be retaining my semen. I'm going to be using it to create this psychodrama. You know what I mean? To create this sexual energy dance in the knowledge that energy and getting outside of my conditioned response is what puts me in touch with spirit. And so that it becomes a devotional practice with my sex partner, right? To be spiritual together, which is to say hot and sexual, like she's going to be wet, I'm going to be hard, right? Like this is beautiful. I mean, why are we ashamed of it? Why can't we talk about it? Why can't we be proud of it? You know what I mean? It's beautiful. And it's like, it's amazing, right? And as we explore it together, it is also generative in our lives, not just generative of another generation, but like that energy. It's like, if you're not making physical babies, the physical creation is the life you share, the moments that you share, the dramatic dynamic that you share and that you create around you, So, energy community is also sex community, right? I mean, consider a place like FetLife, you know what I mean? It's an online sex community, right? And it's like there's a lot of it which is nothing but sexual strength. People in their sexual strength, be there, explore it. If it enriches you, do it. If that's where your stoke is, go there. You know what I mean? And at the same time, for me, I cannot be sexual without energy. You know what I mean? I can't look at it as a material act. For me, it's a part of a higher drama that I'm playing out with my energy being and with spirit in attendance. Whew, that's a big one. But sex is big. Sex is big. Sex is important. Sex is the engine of our lives, right? And if I want to use a crude metaphor and say, well, sex is the engine in the car, right? Like what kind of car it is, how fast it goes, where we are going with the car, how comfortable it is, who's in the car with us. You know what I mean? Like I realize as a metaphor it's going to break down, but for me, any metaphor has got to open. You know what I mean? Sex is a threshold moment where we can either be exploring our energy being, or we can be escaping the energy being, right? Through conditioned response. It comes down to intent. Intent, you know? So if you're working on your energy consciousness and you're disciplined, right? And you determine that you're perhaps not too sexual, or you haven't worked out, where the utmost uplift and energy generation and stoke is in your sexuality, maybe you should be retaining the semen. I can't answer that for you. That's only something an individual can answer for themselves, right? And so for me, this is what I'm saying to you, when it comes down to semen retention, right? Like, I'm in a place where Spirit has made me single right now, and that's okay, because I know what I want to use my sexuality for, and that's for joy, delight, connection, intimacy, and loving, healing, evolving, dreaming, right? And I'm ready. And when I meet her and she meets me, then shit's gonna start happening, right? And in the meantime, I'm using that additional that energy, that sex energy that I'm not dissipating in random connections or whatever it might be, like, I'm using it to simply continue exploring my energy stoke in my music, in this here with you, this dream farming right here, cultivating the energy, right? And I use it as well in the field when I'm working with the people with the mental illness and the addiction issues. That energy is there. You know what I mean? Like it's under tight control, and it is filtered, as I said the other day, through the astringency of harm reduction, trauma-informed care, motivational interviewing, acceptance and commitment therapy, which is for me, evolutionary practice of CBT. And then all the ways that my energy being is, my education in English and philosophy and classics, which is like, the philosophies and art of the ancient world, right? All of my pursuits and interests, right? Like, they all are active in the moment of therapeutic interaction, which is unconditional positive regard, which is loving, healing, evolving, dreaming. And in that zone, I find it's loving, healing with those people, you know what I mean? And getting them to just feel as good as they can in the moment that they're in, right? And that is actually a use of my complete energy system, right? Including my sexuality, but yet expressed simply through unconditional positive regard, which is a non-sexual energy, right? As I said, all sex is energy, but not all energy is sex, right? And so getting in a positive sexual relationship, a positive sexual connection, is something which actually energizes me. So in long-winded, not answer, but in long-winded response to a thank you to a question of semen retention, no, I do not practice that, but I recognize its value. And the only way to recognize its value and knowing individually whether to practice it or not is an inner journey every man's got to make, because, we got the semen, right? So as a man, you got to decide where your stoke is sexually. And if your stoke is in your sexuality at all, because for many it isn't, right? Especially in this day and age, but the topic of manhood I'm going to save for another talk, because this has been an hour. It's one of my longest ones ever. And to talk about manhood, being a man in our culture now, this culture of dissipation, this culture of like chaos that's the result of the total collapse of the old paradigm, right? That's the topic for another day. But for now, I hope you're well. And to whoever made that comment, thank you so much. This is the essence of what I want in this is dialogue, because it gets me outside of myself. It gets me into places that I can't just generate on my own, right? It is interaction which refracts us into ways that we can't comprehend, you know what I mean? And therefore it gets us outside of our conditioning into other places, right? And I gladly go where I can visualize my total being. So thank you for that, whoever you are out there. And stay well and keep reaching, even through your sexuality. Reach to your higher ground. Spirit will be there, Don't be ever ashamed of your sexuality. Rather be proud of it, Listen to what our gender flexible and gender fluid people are teaching us. It's just to be proud of your sexuality and whatever it is. And that includes, old-fashioned heterosexuality. Be proud of it. I'm proud of mine. And you should be proud of yours. And you should be proud of whatever gender expression arises from that engine of energy. Reach up through it into your true energy and be your supreme, beautiful being in loving, healing, evolving, dreaming. Continue to reach. Till next time, be well.